I used to believe that money could buy love. Not romantic love, but the kind that was supposed to be unconditional, the love of a family. I thought if I paid the bills, if I carried the burdens no one else wanted to face, maybe they would finally see me not as an outsider, not as a charity case, but as their daughter, their sister, their blood. For 15 years I tried. I paid for the house they lived in, for the loans they didn't want to talk about, for the car that carried my mother through her recovery. I did it quietly, telling myself family doesn't keep receipts. I told myself belonging was worth any price. But standing alone at JFK Airport, clutching a useless boarding pass, after spending $35,000 to send them all on a European vacation, I finally learned the truth. They didn't forget me, they left me. The memory still burns in my chest. I remember Sarah's perfectly rehearsed panic, her wide eyes, her trembling hands scrolling on her phone as she claimed she'd accidentally canceled my ticket. I remember the way Patricia, my mother, tilted her head with false sympathy and said, "Oh dear, these things happen." I remember my cousin Mark, eyes glued to his phone, pretending not to hear. Not one of them offered to stay behind. Not one suggested we fix it together. Instead, they let the agent explain that the flight was sold out, that the next ticket to Rome was 4 days away. They walked away laughing, carrying their designer luggage, sipping champagne in business class. They sent selfies to our family WhatsApp group, tagged themselves at the Colosseum, posted from the Trevi Fountain. Not once did they message me to ask if I got home safely. Not once did they check if I was okay. I sat in the back of an Uber for 40 minutes that morning, scrolling through their photos, with shaking hands, fighting the humiliation rising in my throat. At home, the silence of my apartment felt heavier than ever. The $35,000 receipt lay on my counter like a cruel joke. And when I opened Facebook that evening, a memory popped up, a Thanksgiving photo from 1 year ago. 12 people smiling at a dining table, but I wasn't in the frame. Because of course I was the one who took it. That was the pattern, wasn't it? I was always there, always giving, always holding the camera. Never in the picture. When I was 8 years old waiting in that foster care office, I thought being adopted meant I'd finally belong. But the Morrisons never let me forget I wasn't one of them. At Sarah's graduation, I was introduced as a family friend. When Grandma passed away, my name wasn't in the obituary. Patricia said it would be confusing to explain. At Christmas, the family card always had everyone's name but mine. Still, I kept giving, I kept hoping. That night after they left me at the airport, I stared at my reflection in the darkened window of my apartment and whispered, "Never again." I wasn't going to beg them to love me anymore. 3 days later, I was in my office pulling up the Morrison family project files I'd once helped structure. They didn't know I'd kept copies. They didn't know the contracts carried my fingerprints in every clause. And they certainly didn't know I'd built a safeguard, a hidden detail buried deep in the paperwork that, if triggered, could shift power in ways they'd never expect. It wasn't revenge I wanted. At least not at first. It was clarity. It was freedom. But as the pieces started falling into place, as I discovered Sarah's embezzlement and Patricia's lies, something inside me hardened. They thought I was weak because I wanted love. They mistook kindness for desperation. They mistook silence for obedience. They had no idea what I was capable of. And so when Marcus Wellington, the CEO of Sterling International, called me offering coffee and an opportunity to discuss the Morrison Legacy Tower, I knew fate had handed me something more than an olive branch. It had handed me a sword. That phone call changed everything. I met Marcus Wellington at a cafe that overlooked the river, a place so pristine it made my boots feel like they didn't belong. He was sharp in a tailored suit, silver hair catching the morning light, but his eyes were kind in a way that unnerved me. He had done his homework. He knew I wasn't just the girl who bought her family a trip to Europe. He knew about the consulting projects I'd quietly run on the side, the late nights spent building models. No one ever saw the hidden clauses that carried my initials in fine print. "Your family underestimates you," Marcus said, sipping his espresso. "But I don't." For a moment, I almost cried. How strange to feel seen by a stranger when your own family never bothered. But I swallowed it down. "They never gave me a seat at the table," I said. "But I built half the table they sit at." He smiled, sliding a folder across the marble. Inside were documents that made my chest tighten. The Morrison Legacy Tower project, worth hundreds of millions, with their names sprawled across the top. and tucked neatly inside my name, credited as an original contributor. Marcus had found it buried where they thought no one would ever look. "I want you on my team," he said. "Not as a consultant, as a partner. I believe in rewarding the people who actually do the work." I stared at him, my pulse pounding. For years I had begged for crumbs, and now here was a man offering me a feast. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about rewriting the story they had told about me for decades, that I was disposable, replaceable, not blood, not real. I shook his hand. My life shifted in that moment. The next weeks blurred into a storm of meetings, contracts, and negotiations. I worked harder than I ever had, but it was a different kind of hard, the kind that builds, not the kind that breaks. Marcus trusted me with decisions my own mother never trusted me to make about Thanksgiving dinner. He gave me authority, and with it responsibility. For the first time, my effort wasn't invisible. Meanwhile, my family was still posting photos from Europe. Photos of Parisian cafes, Venetian gondolas, Swiss chalets. They thought they had left me behind, forgotten, in the dust of their designer luggage. What they didn't realize was that while they were sipping champagne, I was learning to wield power. And then came the day I walked into the Morrison boardroom, not as their forgotten sister, not as their scapegoat, but as Marcus Wellington's partner. The look on their faces when they saw me was a photograph I will carry in my heart forever. Sarah's glass of water froze halfway to her lips. Patricia's pearls twisted in her fingers like a rosary. My father looked between them, bewildered, as if I had stepped out of a ghost story. "You're not supposed to be here," Patricia said finally, her voice sharp. But Marcus only smiled, gesturing for me to take a seat at his right hand. "She's exactly where she belongs." My sister tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. "She's just—" "Enough," Marcus interrupted. His tone wasn't loud, but it cut through the room. "From this day forward, Leah is no longer just the girl you call when you need a bailout. She's a partner, and she has authority." The silence that followed was almost holy. In that moment, all the years of being invisible crystallized into a single truth. I didn't need their validation. I had built my own. But still, part of me wanted them to feel it, the weight of what they had thrown away, the sharp edge of what they had dismissed. I wanted them to know the cost of their cruelty. And as I watched Sarah's face pale, I knew they were beginning to understand. I wish I could tell you they congratulated me, that something soft and human flickered across my mother's face, that my sister remembered the girl who sat up with her through fevers and breakup nights. But the Morrison boardroom had a climate of its own, cold, rehearsed, perfumed with other people's power. Patricia put on her public voice, the one she used to charm donors and quiet reporters. "We're delighted you're contributing, Leah," she said, as if I were a new intern whose name she might forget by lunch. Sarah stared at me with the practiced smile of a woman who understood optics and nothing about love. Marcus slid a second folder across the table. "Before we talk future, we should talk past," he said. "Audits reveal stories." I opened the folder and saw a constellation of transactions I already knew by feeling, if not by ledger wire transfers that wandered, consulting fees with no deliverables, a vendor address that matched a mailbox Sarah rented 2 blocks from her apartment. Dates leapt out like teeth. One of them was the morning they forgot my ticket to Europe. Another matched the day I wired a mortgage payment to keep their house from slipping into foreclosure. Each gift I had pressed into their hands had been followed by a siphon I hadn't seen. My throat went hot. For years I had told myself I was unlucky, dramatic, oversensitive. How many times had I swallowed confusion because the alternative, believing they were the kind of people who would take and take, was too cruel to hold? Marcus kept speaking, calm as winter. "We traced $1.2 million out of project accounts across 18 months. Your family office signed the approvals. So did your CFO." He glanced toward Patricia. "We've already spoken to him." My mother's pearls made a small sound as they clicked against one another. "This is a misunderstanding." Sarah leaned forward, voice cool. "Even if errors were made, they're internal, not material to Sterling." Marcus's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Material is a flexible word, Ms. Morrison. So is internal." He let the silence sit. "Leah wrote the governance memo on this development. You remember the clawback clauses?" I remembered. I had written them in a haze of late nights a year ago, when they still asked me to polish things and never gave me credit. I wrote them like prayers with teeth in the event of misappropriation ownership tranches revert to the project entity. In the event of owner misconduct, voting rights reassigned to independent partners. I had left those lines in the fine print like a lighthouse you only see when the weather turns. Sarah's eyes flicked over the pages. This language is vague. It's specific, I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. It protects the project over the egos that endanger it. Patricia turned to me, then the public mask flickering. Leah, darling, we can explain the Europe situation. You know how busy everyone was. The airline made an error. I felt the sting in my palms where my nails pressed crescents. The airline didn't empty your project accounts. My voice was low, not a performance, just the truth carrying its own gravity. You did. For a heartbeat, the room forgot to breathe. My father looked at me like a man waking up on a train moving the wrong direction. He had always chosen comfort over clarity. Now clarity was choosing him. Marcus tapped the last page. Per the governance Leah authored, I'm invoking Section 9. Upon board acknowledgement, voting control passes to Sterling and appointed partners for 12 months, while a forensic audit completes. During that time, signatory access is suspended for Morrisons with exposure. Exposure, Sarah snapped. You mean us. I mean choices, Marcus said. But if you prefer pronouns, yes. He looked to me then, not asking, but inviting. Leah. It was so small, the tilt of his head, the space he left for me to enter, but it split something open in me. How many rooms had I sat in, shrinking into chair corners while they spoke over me with my words in their mouths? I felt the past press against my back and then fall away. I support the invocation, I said, and I recommend we notify lenders in the city now before speculation grows teeth. We'll keep the trades paid and the cranes moving. We'll tell the truth before rumors can pretend to be it. Something like pride crossed Marcus's face. He nodded to the council at the end of the table. Draft the notices. Patricia's hand flattened on the table like she could physically stop the motion of what we'd set in place. Leah, think about the family. This will embarrass us. I thought of the gate at JFK, the way the agent's eyes had softened when she realized I was being left. I thought of the years my name missed from Christmas cards and obituaries and donor walls. Family to them had always meant audience. This will protect the workers who pour your concrete and wire your lights, I said. It will protect the pension fund you invited into this deal. It will protect the city that believed you. If embarrassment is the price of integrity, it's a discount. Sarah laughed, a short, frantic sound. You don't belong at this table. You never have. You're an adoptee with a savior complex. The old wound flared, 8 years old, in a too-bright office, swinging my legs while strangers decided my last name, and then miraculously it cooled. Shame didn't stick where it used to. I was not a vacancy to be filled. I was the one who built the table. I met her gaze. I belong where my work lives. Council slid signature pages across the wood. Marcus signed. I signed. The pen was heavier than I expected. Or maybe it was my hand that had grown stronger. Effective immediately, the lawyer said. Sterling and Ms. Bennett assume interim control. My mother stood too quickly, chair legs screeching. You will ruin us. You did this, I said, not unkindly. I'm just turning on the lights. We adjourned. Outside the glass box of that room, the city looked the same. Cabs shouldering through traffic steam, rising from some hidden grate, a pigeon walking like a person late for work. Marcus touched my elbow. You did well, he said. This will get louder before it's done. I know, I said. But what I didn't say was how quiet it felt inside me, like a storm had finally moved past the house and left the air scrubbed clean. In the elevator, my phone buzzed. A photo from the family WhatsApp. Sarah in a silk blouse, Patricia in pearls, Mark with a Negroni, all of them on a terrace somewhere weeks ago, captioned, La Familia. The timestamp made my stomach turn. It was the night after the airport. They had toasted themselves while I stared at a blank ceiling and tried to learn how to sleep. Another buzz. A new message, this one direct, from Sarah. We need to talk, privately. The elevator chimed, doors parting to the lobby. Marcus stepped out. I stayed a beat longer. My reflection in the brass doors looked like someone I might trust. I typed back, we will, but not in private, not anymore. That evening, I drove to the river parking where the water keeps its own counsel. I sat with my window down listening to gulls argue over something that didn't matter, and let myself feel the complicated ache of winning without being loved. Choosing integrity had not stitched the small girl inside me into some new family story. It had simply told her she could walk away from the table without starving. Headlights slowed beside me, Ethan's truck. He climbed in, still smelling like sawdust and sun, and didn't ask what happened. He let me tell it when I was ready. I laid my head on his shoulder and watched the last light drain from the day. "We'll keep the cranes moving," I said, more to convince the universe than him. "We will," he answered, "and when it gets ugly, we'll plant anyway." I laughed then, raw and grateful, because he always used the only map we trusted: seasons, effort, faith. My phone lit again. "Marcus City wants a joint statement tomorrow. Are you up for it?" I thumbed a reply. "I've been up for it my whole life. I just didn't know it yet." The press conference was scheduled for noon in a glass atrium that made every word echo like a sermon. Reporters swarmed the steps outside microphones like hungry mouths, cameras blinking in steady rhythm. I'd stood in front of cameras before family Christmas cards, graduation photos where I was tucked at the edge of the frame, but never like this. Never with the full heat of a city's gaze waiting to measure me. Marcus stood beside me, steady as a metronome. "They'll come for you," he warned quietly. "They'll question your authority, your bloodline, your right to be here. Don't defend your worth. State it. Let the facts do the cutting." The facts. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears, but when the mayor's aide introduced us, I stepped forward. The lights hit hard, but the words came clean. This project was meant to be a legacy. I began, voice steadier than I felt. A promise to the workers, the lenders, the city we love. But legacies aren't built on deception. They're built on truth. Safeguards were written into these contracts to protect that truth, and today those safeguards are being enforced. Construction will continue. Wages will be paid. The Morrison name will not be buried, but it will be examined. A forest of hands shot up. "Ms. Bennett," a reporter called. "Is it true your own family cut you out of a European trip just weeks ago?" The question was a knife wrapped in velvet. I let it land. "It's true," I said. "They left me at the gate after I paid their way. And I am grateful they did. Because it showed me exactly what needed to change, not just in my family, but in how we treat loyalty as something to be exploited instead of honored." The atrium buzzed, the scent of ink and heat thick in the air. Another voice rose. "You're adopted. Do you believe that's why you were treated differently?" There it was, the old wound dressed as inquiry. I drew a breath. Adoption gave me a family name, but it didn't guarantee a family heart. They reminded me of that every chance they got. But what I've learned is this belonging doesn't come from shared blood. It comes from shared integrity. And that's what I stand for here today. Flashes strobed. I felt strangely unburdened, like every time I said the truth aloud, the weight of years slid further from my shoulders. When the conference ended, Marcus clasped my hand before the cameras. "You did more than hold your own," he murmured. "You reset the terms." But as we stepped back into the corridor, my phone pulsed with messages I hadn't prepared for. "Patricia, you're humiliating us. Sarah dinner. Just us. No press. Mark. You've made your point. Let it go before it gets worse." Worse. As if worse were still possible after $35,000, after years of ghosting my name out of their family stories. That night I didn't answer. I sat on the porch with Ethan, the sky wide and bruised above us, cicadas humming like an old hymn. He passed me a mug of tea and said, "If you're waiting for them to apologize, don't. They don't know how." "I'm not waiting," I said, though part of me still was. Part of me still pictured Sarah knocking on my door with tears in her eyes, my mother finally saying the words I'd starved for: "We're sorry. We were wrong. You belong with us." But those were fairy tales, and I was too old for fairy tales. 2 weeks later, subpoenas landed on their doorstep. The audit bared teeth sharper than any speech I could give. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers sang of greed. Lavish vacations coded as consulting expenses. Spa retreats labeled strategic planning. Wire transfers that led back to Sarah's private accounts. The phone calls came desperate now. Patricia weeping, Sarah seething, Mark bargaining. I didn't block them, but I didn't answer either. Some silences aren't punishments, they're protection. The day the auditors froze their accounts, I walked past the mirrored tower they had once called their crown jewel. Inside, workers in orange vests kept pouring concrete unbothered. The city hummed on, alive and indifferent. And I realized something I hadn't before: the world doesn't pause for betrayal. It just waits for you to decide how to move within it. When I got home, Emma was waiting on the porch, a box in her lap. She looked up with the kind of eyes that make you believe in next generations. "Mom," she said, "they sent these. Old photos. They said you should have them." Inside the box were years I had missed: birthday parties where I wasn't invited into, the frame graduations where I stood behind the camera. My absence catalogued in glossy paper. My sister smiling in every shot like she had already won. I closed the lid gently. "They gave me more proof than they know," I said. Emma touched my hand. "Then maybe it's time to stop proving and start living." Her words rooted in me, steady and undeniable. Emma's words stayed with me like a lantern in the dark. Stop proving, start living. It was so simple, and yet it unraveled years of ache inside me. For so long, every breath I took seemed aimed at convincing my family I deserved a seat at their table. But what if the table itself had never been mine to sit at? What if I could build my own? The weeks after the audit were a blur of fallout. Patricia's name began appearing in headlines she couldn't control: Morrison matriarch, under investigation. Sarah's social media feeds, once filled with champagne flutes and Italian sunsets, went quiet. Even Mark, who had always pretended to be neutral, found himself answering questions about funds that vanished under his watch. And then came the call I never thought I would hear. Patricia's number flashing on my screen, her voice trembling like crystal about to crack. "Leah," she whispered, "we need you, please. They're circling us. The lenders, the city, the press. You have to speak for us." For a moment, the child in me stirred, the little girl who once would have run at the sound of that plea, desperate to finally be wanted. But I was no longer her. "You left me at an airport," I said, my voice even. "You left me for dead in every way that mattered. And now you want me to save you." There was silence, then a shuddered inhale. "We're still family." "Family?" I laughed softly. "Family doesn't forget your name in obituaries. Family doesn't send postcards from Paris after stranding you. Family doesn't drain accounts you bled for. You don't get to use that word like a shield now." I hung up before she could answer. And instead of the crushing guilt I expected, I felt light, so light I thought the air itself had shifted. That weekend I stood with Marcus at the ribbon cutting for the Morrison's soon-to-be renamed Sterling Legacy Tower. Reporters swarmed again, cameras flashing, the mayor shaking hands. I wore a dress the color of steel and a resolve even stronger. Marcus introduced me not as a consultant, not even as a partner, but as the woman who had saved the project. Applause swelled, echoing in the cavernous lobby. And though part of me still ached, still wished my mother's clap had been among them, I understood something profound. Vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with peace. That night, Ethan and I sat on our porch again, the cicadas singing, the world simple and honest around us. He poured me a glass of wine and asked, "So what now?" I looked at the fields stretching into the dark, at the stars scattered like promises. "Now," I said, "I live. Not to prove them wrong, not to prove myself right, just to live." For the first time, the words didn't feel like a performance. They felt like truth. So here's the lesson I want to leave you with if you've listened this far. Don't bleed yourself dry to earn love that should have been free. Don't wait for people to see you if they've already decided to look past you. Build your own table, plant your own field, write your own name where it can't be erased. And when the day comes that they finally notice, let it be too late for them to matter. If this story spoke to you, I invite you to like this video, share it with someone who needs strength, and subscribe for more stories that remind us how even the deepest betrayal can lead to unexpected freedom. And please tell me in the comments, what tables have you built for yourself when others shut the door?